Iceland doesn't feel like Earth. Black beaches beneath glaciers. Waterfalls falling through volcanic valleys. Mountains covered in moss so bright, they almost look unreal. And landscapes so strange, they feel untouched by time itself. There are places in this world that feel beautiful. Places that feel dramatic. Places that feel historic. Iceland feels otherworldly. Something entirely different from all of those. A country that exists in a category of its own. And once you see it, it becomes impossible to forget. Hidden in the North Atlantic lies a country shaped by fire, ice, storms, and isolation. A place of volcanic deserts, frozen lagoons, tiny churches beneath giant mountains, and roads leading into landscapes that barely seem real. A country that has been shaping itself for thousands of years, through eruptions, through glacial movement, through storms that arrive without warning. And that process never stopped. Iceland is still being formed, still moving, still changing, which is part of what makes it feel so alive. If you love discovering extraordinary places, subscribe. There's much more ahead. The black sand beaches. The first thing that shocks most travelers about Iceland is the contrast. Jet black beaches beside crashing white waves, towering basalt cliffs rising from the ocean, sea stacks standing alone in the Atlantic like ancient monuments. And the strange thing is, it all makes sense here. The black sand came from lava. The cliffs were shaped by eruptions. The sea stacks are what's left after centuries of the ocean breaking everything else down. Every part of the coastline tells the same geological story. A story of fire meeting water, of land being made and unmade over and over again. Places like Reynisfjara feel almost unreal, especially during storms, when dark clouds move across the coast and the entire landscape feels cinematic, wild, powerful, untamed. And suddenly, Iceland stops feeling like Europe. It feels like another planet. A place where the rules of landscape that apply everywhere else simply don't apply here. But Iceland becomes even stranger farther inland. Waterfalls and volcanic landscapes. Across Iceland, waterfalls appear everywhere. Some plunge beside roads. Others hide deep inside volcanic canyons. Some you hear before you see. That sound of falling water growing louder as you walk through mist, through moss, through terrain that feels like it belongs to a different era entirely. Skogafoss crashes down through mist and rainbows. Seljalandsfoss disappears behind cliffs you can actually walk through. And there are dozens more that most travelers never reach. Falls with no signposts. Falls at the end of long trails through lava fields. Falls that feel like they belong to you alone because nobody else happened to be there that day. And surrounding all of them, lava fields stretch endlessly beneath moss-covered hills. Entire landscapes shaped by eruptions thousands of years ago. The moss grows slowly here, takes decades to establish itself, which means the landscape you're walking through carries time in a way that's hard to explain. Nothing feels ordinary here. Even silence feels dramatic. Even standing still feels like something is happening around you. But one of Iceland's greatest wonders only appears after dark. The Northern Lights. Winter transforms Iceland completely. Snow covers volcanic valleys. Roads vanish beneath storms. The days grow short, then shorter still, until the darkness becomes something you live inside rather than something that just arrives at the end of the day. And then, the Northern Lights appear. Green ribbons moving silently across Arctic skies. Reflections dancing over frozen lagoons. Entire mountains glowing beneath shifting color. And for a moment, the world feels almost unreal. Many travelers come to Iceland hoping to see the aurora. They track the forecasts. They drive away from towns to escape the light. They wait in the cold, watching the sky. But few expect how emotional the experience feels in person. Not just beautiful, not just impressive. Something deeper than both of those. Quiet, ancient, almost spiritual. Like being allowed to see something that was never meant to be explained, only witnessed. Quick question. Would you rather explore Iceland beneath the midnight sun or experience the Northern Lights in winter? Tell me in the comments. But Iceland still hides landscapes that barely seem possible. The highlands and hidden roads. Deep inside Iceland, the landscape changes again. The highlands, black volcanic deserts, steam rising from the earth, rivers cutting through empty valleys, and roads leading through places that feel untouched by humanity. These are roads that close for most of the year. Roads that require the right vehicle, the right conditions, and a certain willingness to go somewhere that offers no guarantees, no fuel stations for hours, no phone signal, no safety net of any kind. Just the road, and whatever is on either side of it. Driving here feels surreal. Hours pass without seeing another town, sometimes another person. Only wind, mountains, and endless silence. A silence so complete it starts to feel like its own kind of presence, like the landscape itself is paying attention. And maybe that isolation is what makes Iceland feel so unforgettable, because it strips away everything familiar and leaves you with something you can't quite name. But hidden among all this wilderness are tiny Icelandic villages and slow life. Scattered across the coast are villages that seem suspended between mountains and sea, tiny harbors beneath dramatic cliffs, colorful homes glowing against dark winter landscapes, churches standing alone beside waterfalls and open fields, communities that have existed here for generations, that learned how to build a life around storms, around darkness, around a landscape that gives a great deal but asks a great deal in return. In places like Vik and Seyðisfjörður, life feels slower, simpler, more honest in some way that's hard to explain until you've been there. And despite Iceland's harsh environment, there's warmth here, cozy cafes, hot coffee beside frozen windows. The kind of warmth that means more when the cold outside is real. Locals gathering while storms move across the mountains outside, going about their days, talking, laughing, completely at ease with the landscape that would overwhelm most visitors. And somehow, those quiet moments become just as memorable as the landscapes themselves. Maybe more so, because the landscapes stay with you as images, but those human moments stay with you as feelings. And then there's the food shaped by Iceland's extreme environment. For centuries, survival in Iceland depended on adapting to isolation and harsh weather. There was no importing your way out of a problem, no nearby country to trade with easily, no choice but to use what the land and the sea provided. Fresh seafood became central to life, Arctic char, lamb raised on open volcanic land, animals that roam freely across highland terrain, eating wild grass, breathing clean air, which means the meat here carries a quality that's immediately noticeable. Warm soups served during freezing winters, bread baked underground using geothermal heat, a culture of resourcefulness that became a cuisine. And geothermal energy shapes daily life even now. Hot springs appear across the country. Steam rises from the earth beneath snowy landscapes. And nowhere feels more surreal than sitting inside a natural hot spring while snow falls around you. The water warm, the air cold, the sky above completely open. In Iceland, even ordinary moments feel extraordinary. Even the things that would be mundane elsewhere, a warm meal, a hot bath, a quiet evening, carry a different weight here, because the environment around them is anything but ordinary. So what makes Iceland unforgettable? Maybe it's the contrasts: fire and ice, black beaches and white glaciers, frozen silence and erupting volcanoes, tiny villages beneath giant mountains, darkness for months and then light that never ends, harshness and warmth existing right next to each other. A country that feels like it should be impossible to live in, and yet people have lived here for over 1,000 years, built communities, told stories, created a culture out of conditions that would have stopped most civilizations entirely. Iceland feels raw, powerful, almost untouched by the modern world, not in a way that feels preserved or curated, but in a way that feels genuinely indifferent. A landscape that existed before people arrived and will continue long after. And maybe that's why it stays with people so deeply. Because Iceland doesn't feel like somewhere you simply visit. It feels like somewhere you survive, experience, and never fully forget. A place that changes the scale of things. That makes everything else feel slightly smaller and slightly more manageable by comparison. Because if a place like this can exist, then the world is clearly much stranger and much more extraordinary than most of us ever give it credit for. If you enjoyed exploring Iceland, subscribe for more journeys like this. And tell me, what part of Iceland would you want to experience first?